My brother slid a list of repairs across the conference table and told the landlord to keep it quick. He had a lunch rush to get back to. Then the landlord pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. And the landlord was me. For almost 3 years, my father cooked 6 days a week in the diner he built with his own 2 hands, and he never took home $1. Here is the part that should make your skin move. On paper, he was paid every single Friday, $15 an hour, printed, filed, and reported. Neat, as a hymn book. The checks existed. They just never touched his hands. And here is what my brother did not know. While he checked his watch across that table, I audit payrolls for a living. Finding stolen wages is not my hobby. It is my job title. And for 6 years, every rent check my brother signed with that big looping signature of his had been mailed to a post office box that belongs to me. Stay with me, because by the end of that meeting, my brother had 1 pen, 2 choices, and 19 days. My name is Dana Marsh. I am 39 years old, and welcome back to Quiet Ledger Stories, where the patient ones keep the receipts, and family learns the hard way that quiet was never the same thing as blind. If stories about standing up for the people who fed you speak to something in you, subscribe and stay close, because this one ends with a paintbrush. To explain that conference room, I have to take you back exactly once. One jump, and then we walk forward together, all the way to a rainy anniversary morning that split my life into before and after. Everything in this story hangs off that morning. So, here is the jump. 6 years before that morning, a letter arrived that changed everything, and nobody in my family ever knew it existed. 6 years before that morning, my father was 65 years old and had been unlocking the same diner since he was 21. The Blue Door Diner on Cascade Street in Erie, Pennsylvania. 14 stools, 9 booths, a griddle older than me, and a front door my father painted blue every April with a 2-inch brush. One careful coat, because he said a door tells people what to expect from the kitchen. My mother worked the register at that door. For 40 years, my father worked the grill. He kept a little order pad in his shirt pocket, the cheap kind, 50 pages, and he wrote everything in it. Prep lists. Deliveries. Hours. Who covered? Whose shift? When the day was over, he would tap the pocket and say, "We will settle up later. It all gets written down." That was just my father. Remember the pads. I am asking you now, early, on purpose. Remember the pads. The end is past. My brother Kurt is 6 years older than me. He stayed. I want to say that plainly and give him the credit, because he earned it once. While I went off to college, and then into the strangest job you have never heard of, Kurt stood next to my father at that griddle. 10 years before that rainy morning, my father made it official. He took Kurt to a lawyer's office and made him a half-partner in the diner. Real papers, done right, witnessed and filed. They toasted with champagne poured into coffee mugs, because my father refused to buy glasses for a one-time event. Half the Blue Door was Kurt's fair and square, and I flew home for the party and hugged my brother, and meant it, and me. I became the person who reads paychecks for a living. I am a certified payroll auditor. In plain words, companies are required to pay people what the paper says they were paid, and my whole job is checking that the paper and the money actually match. I sit in trailers on construction sites and in back offices that smell like toner, and I compare what a company reported against what actually landed in workers' bank accounts. You would be amazed how often those 2 numbers are strangers. I lived out of a suitcase 200 nights a year, kept a small apartment in Pittsburgh, 2 hours down the road. No husband, no kids, no houseplants that survived me. My family understood my job as something with numbers. Nobody ever asked a second question about it. That turned out to matter. Now, the letter. 6 years before that morning, the man who owned my father's whole block, an old landlord who had charged nearly the same rent since the 90s, sent every tenant a letter saying he was retiring to Arizona and selling the buildings. A restaurant group from Cleveland was already circling. My father called me on a Sunday night, and he used his calm voice, which is how I know when he is terrified. He said, "Honey, if the rent triples, the Blue Door has about 14 months of life in it." Then he changed the subject to whether I was eating enough. I had $90,000 saved. That is what 200 nights a year of per diem living, and no life at all, will build you in a decade. 12 days later, I bought my father's building, $280,000. 90,000 down, the mortgage in the name of a little company I created, called Riverbend Holdings. Because that is how you buy a building, through a company. The rent stayed almost exactly what it had been, $2,100 a month, mailed to a post office box. And then, I did the thing that shaped the next 6 years. I told no one. Not my father. Especially not Kurt. Understand? Why? Kurt had just become the face of the diner. My father was easing back. My brother was finally at 40, the man in charge of something, and he wore it like a coat that fit. If it came out that his little sister quietly owned the ground under his feet, something in him would have folded. So the family was told the building sold to an out-of-town holding company that decided to keep the rents reasonable. My father said a prayer of thanks for strangers with soft hearts. I sat on a hotel bed in Columbus and listened to him say it and kept my mouth shut. It was a kindness. I want you to hold on to that kindness, because it is the exact thing that let me see who my brother really was, years before anyone else did. Because here is what nobody tells you about being a secret landlord. People write to you. Within a month of the sale, Riverbend Holdings received its first email from Kurt Marsh. I still have it. There was no hello. There was a numbered list of demands, a deadline he invented, and a closing line that said, "I would hate for a new owner to start off on the wrong foot in this town." My brother, who charmed every customer by name, who could warm up a room like a porch light, wrote to a stranger he believed had just saved his family's diner. And the first thing he reached for was a threat. In person that year, he hugged me at Thanksgiving and carved the turkey. On my screen, unsigned, he showed me the other face. It took me 6 years to accept that the man in the emails was the real one. Keep that in your pocket. We are going to need it. 3 years before that morning, my mother died, an aneurysm, on a Sunday, at her own kitchen table, with the church bulletin still folded in her hand. She was 68. I got the call in a parking lot in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I do not remember the drive home. Not 1 mile of it. The funeral was the kind where the line goes out the door. Because when you have made eggs for a town for 40 years, the town shows up. My father stood at the front of that line for 4 hours and thanked every single person, and his hands did not shake until the last one left. I stayed 9 days. I should have stayed 90, because 2 weeks after we buried my mother, while I was back on the road in a site trailer counting other men's wages, my brother came to a grieving man's kitchen table with a folder, and he called what was inside it insurance paperwork. It was not insurance paperwork. It was an amendment to the partnership. 2 pages. In plain words, a paper that said my father was stepping back from owner to advisor. Advisor. A word that means you can be thanked and ignored in the same sentence. My father, who had not slept a full night in 2 weeks, who was signing sympathy card, thank yous in stacks of 40, signed where his son pointed, between a casserole delivery and a phone call from the monument company. 11 minutes at a kitchen table. It took me 3 years and a shoebox to undo them. If you have ever watched somebody use grief as a signing window, if you have ever seen the folder come out while the flowers were still fresh, you know exactly the kind of man we are dealing with. And you know, he did not think of himself as a thief. That is the part that makes it worse. Kurt would have passed a lie detector. In his mind, he was simplifying, protecting Dad, getting the house in order. Every wolf I have ever audited believed he was a shepherd with a difficult flock. I learned about the amendment the way I learned about everything back then. One sentence at a time, on Sunday calls. Months late. Dad mentioned it in passing. The way you mention weather. Kurt handled some paperwork. Honey, it simplifies things for the taxes. I asked what paperwork. He said, oh, you know your brother. He keeps it all straight. We settle up later. There, it was. My father's phrase, in my father's voice, and it did not sound like my father anymore. It sounded like something he had been handed and told to hold. I want to be fair here, because fair is the only thing that separates this story from a tantrum. I did not get on a plane. I was mid-audit on a hospital project with 400 workers and a filing deadline. And I told myself what you tell yourself. Dad sounds okay. Kurt has always been dramatic about paperwork. I will look at it all at Christmas. You can lose a whole year in the space between I will look at it and Christmas. I lost 3. 32 months before that morning, my brother threw my father a retirement party. I need you to sit with the shape of that sentence. Nobody had discussed retirement with my father. Kurt rented the back room of the Elks Lodge, invited half of Cascade Street, ordered a cake with a fishing pole on it, and announced my father's retirement to a room my father was standing in. My dad does not fish. He has never fished. He stood there holding a paper plate while 60 people toasted the end of a working life he had no intention of ending. And because he is who he is, he smiled and thanked them. Because correcting his son in public was a cruelty he was not capable of. I watched it on a video call propped against a lamp in a motel outside Harrisburg. I watched my father get retired the way other men get robbed, to applause. And here is what actually changed that week. Because a party is only a cover story for a transaction. The following Monday, my father was at the griddle at 5 in the morning. Same as every Monday, for 50 years. But now, he was there as family, helping out. His paycheck stopped, and when he asked about it gently once, my brother clapped him on the shoulder and said the sentence this whole story orbits around. We will settle up later. Dad, it all evens out in the family. We will settle up later. Write that down somewhere, because you are going to hear it again at the end of this story, and it is going to mean something very different when you do. What I did not know then, what nobody knew, was that on paper, my father's paychecks never stopped at all. On paper, they got regular, $15 an hour, 50 hours a week. Reported, filed, and recorded in the diner's books like clockwork. Week after week after week. Real wages in every file cabinet that mattered, and not $1 of it ever crossing my father's palm. Hold that. I am going to open that particular door for you at the exact moment I opened it in real life, in a conference room, with my brother watching. The months after that party, the changes came the way my father later described them, one hallway at a time. His truck went first. A gray pickup he had owned for 19 years, sold because Kurt said it made no sense to insure 3 vehicles when the diner had a van. The money from the truck went into the walk-in freezer compressor, or so the sentence went. Then, his hours grew. 5 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon became 5 to 5, because the new evening cook did not work out, and then the next one did not work out either. And somehow the person covering for every cook who did not work out was a man in his late 60s with a shoulder that ached in the rain. Then came what Kurt called household pooling, which in plain words meant that $800 moved out of my father's little checking account into what my brother named the family account. Every single month, the day after his Social Security landed, for shared costs. Kurt said, shared. My father owns his little house outright. His costs are heart medication, property taxes, and oatmeal. Do the math with me for one breath, and then I will do the rest of the math for you for the rest of this story. $800 a month for 32 months. $25,600. That was every dollar of margin an old man had, walking out of his account on a schedule, while he stood 10 hours a day at a griddle for free. When people ask me why I did what I did, I do not describe feelings. I say, that number. On our Sunday calls, my father shrank in sentences. If you have ever listened to someone you love make themselves smaller one phone call at a time, if you have heard a person start asking permission in their own life, you know the sound. It is not dramatic. That is the horror of it. It is a man saying, well, it is their turn to steer, kiddo. It is a man laughing, a half beat late. It is a man who built a room, going quiet in it. Stay with me now, because the next spring, they came for the door. About 14 months before that morning, my brother hired a consultant, a brand consultant, which in plain words is a stranger you pay to tell you that your family's name is a font. The Blue Door Diner became the Marsh Table. New sign, new menus, new slogan about elevated comfort. Jean's Hash, which had been on that menu since before I was born, became something called Heritage Skillet. And on a Tuesday in April, a painter on a ladder covered my father's blue door in a color, the sample card called Urban Fog. My father repainted that door blue every April for 50 Aprils. That April, he stood across the street on the sidewalk and watched a stranger paint it gray, and then he went inside and did the lunch prep. They took down the photograph, too. Opening day, 1976. My mother and father in front of the door, her hand on his chest, both of them laughing at something off camera that nobody alive remembers. It had hung on the same nail by the register for as long as the register existed. Kurt's wife Bryn took it down during the refresh and hung a chalkboard in its place with a quote about gathering. She posted the makeover online with the caption, honoring our family legacy. My mother's face went into a box in the storeroom, under a stack of laminated menus. Honoring our family legacy. A door is a small thing to repaint. It took me too long to understand that it was an announcement. The person who finally said it out loud was Ruthie. Ruthie has waited tables at the Blue Door for 40 years. My mother hired her when they were both young enough to work a double and go dancing after. She is 68 now, sharp as a boning knife, and she does not call people. She handles things. So when my phone showed a voicemail from Ruthie, I stepped out of a job trailer in the rain to listen to it. Because Ruthie leaving a voicemail is a flare going up over the water. Her voice was flat and careful. Dana, honey, I do not call to gossip, so I will say at once. They painted the door. They took your mama's picture off the nail, and this morning I watched your daddy hang his apron on a hook by the back door like a guest. He built this room, and he is standing in it like a guest. You come look at him with your own eyes. I called my father that night. He minimized everything, because minimizing is his love language. The door is just paint. Kiddo, the picture is safe, in a box. Kurt has big plans. And then, softer, the sentence that kept me up. It is fine. Honey, I write it all down. We settle up later. He was still keeping the pads. 68, 69, 70 years old, unpaid, unnamed. And every night he still sat at his kitchen table and wrote the date, the hours, and what he did that day in a 50-page pad from the dollar store. Because his whole life, that is what an honest man did with a day of work. Force of habit. He would have told you, hold on, you will see what that habit turns into. 6 weeks before that morning, the flare went up for the second time, and this time, it burned. Ruthie called me on a Thursday night. No voicemail. Liv, which had happened maybe twice in my life. She had been at the pharmacy on Peach Street picking up her blood pressure refill. And 2 spots ahead of her in line was my father. His heart medication had come due. $184. His card was declined. And my father, in his zipped-up work coat, quiet as a library, asked the pharmacist if it was possible to buy just 2 weeks of the month. He counted out what he had in ones and fives. Ruthie stepped up and paid the difference before the pharmacist could answer, and my father let her, which frightened me more than anything else in this story so far, because my father has never let anyone pay for anything in his life. Ruthie told me all of it in her flat, careful voice. And then, she said, I did not tell him I was calling you, and I said, good. Do not tell anyone anything. I am coming home, and nobody gets to rehearse. I hung up and stood in a hotel hallway in Akron, and I felt the thing I feel maybe twice a year on the job, when the numbers stop being numbers. I went very calm and very cold. In my work, when you find the thread, you do not yank it. You document it. You let the payroll keep lying to you, in writing for as long as it wants. And then you pull once. I booked leave. I had been banking for 3 years. I told my office. I had a family matter. I told Ohio and Pennsylvania. Nothing at all. The diner's 50th anniversary was 6 weeks out. My brother was planning a celebration for it, and I planned my arrival for that exact morning, because I wanted to see the story they performed when they thought no one who mattered was watching. And now, we are there. The morning, everything in this story hangs from. If you remember one scene from this video, it will be this one. 5:40 in the morning on a Saturday in April, raining the way Erie rains, sideways and personal. I parked my rental truck across the street from the diner with the lights off, like a person on a stakeout, because that is what I was. The banner above the windows said, celebrating 50 years. The Marsh table, the door under the banner, was urban fog gray, and at 5:44, a figure came around the corner on foot, in the rain. No truck, because his truck was sold. And my 71-year-old father let himself in the back and turned on the lights of the restaurant he opened when he was 21. I watched him drag 2 trash cans to the curb in the rain, favoring the bad shoulder. I watched him salt the front steps for customers who would not arrive for 90 minutes. At 6:10, I crossed the street and went in and sat at the counter in a ball cap like a stranger. And Ruthie looked up from the coffee station, and her whole body went still, and I gave her one small shake of my head. And God bless that woman. She poured me coffee and called me Han like she had never seen me before in her life. For 2 hours I watched my father work a griddle with the economy of 50 years. Not one wasted motion, eggs hash, order wheel, while a 19-year-old runner called him old-timer, affectionately, the way you name a fixture. My father is not a fixture. He is the load-bearing wall. At 8:40, my brother arrived. I want to describe this precisely, because I only got to see it because he did not know I was there. Kurt came in the front door, carrying a paper cup of coffee from the chain place 2 blocks down. He walked the dining room like a mayor, first names, shoulder squeezes. A joke for the regulars at the window booth. He walked past the griddle, past our father, without a word. No look. Nothing. The way you pass a piece of equipment that is running fine. And at 9, standing by the register with a produce vendor, close enough that I could hear it over my coffee cup. My brother said the sentence I had flown home to catch. The vendor asked, still, got the old man on the line. Huh? And Kurt laughed and said, he is basically retired. He just likes to help. It keeps him young. He is basically retired. 50 hours that week. He just likes to help. At noon, there was a little anniversary speech. Kurt stood on a chair, and he thanked the community, and he thanked his amazing wife for the vision, and he thanked 50 years of loyal customers, and he called my father, who was at that moment scraping the griddle behind him. Our founder emeritus, a Latin word that means we kept the picture and lost the man. Ha. 60 people applauded. My father raised his spatula about 4 inches, which for him is a standing ovation, and went back to work. Someone wanted a photo with the founder, and I watched my brother step into the frame. I did not stand up. I did not say one word. If you have ever had to sit still inside the sound of your own pulse, if you have ever waited to speak until the thing you said could not be argued with, then you know exactly what those hours cost. And you know they were the cheapest thing I bought that year. At 2 in the afternoon, my father stepped out the back door to break down boxes, alone in the wet alley. And that is where I was standing. He looked up, and for about 1 second I got everything. His whole face opening. My name in his mouth like a holiday. Dana. And then, I will never forget this. The light shut. His eyes went past me to the door. Checking it, he stepped close, gripped my arms, and whispered, in the alley behind his own diner, honey, why did you not call ahead? They do not love surprises. I shouldn't though. My father was whispering. Then he hugged me hard, and I could feel through his coat what 6 days a week does to a man his age, and his hands on my sleeves were griddle scarred and rope. Then, and the last time I held those hands, they could crack 4 eggs at once, 2 to a palm, and laugh about it. I said, take a late lunch with me, Dad. He looked at the door again and said, we are short-handed. I said, Dad. 1 hour. And Ruthie appeared in the doorway behind him like a bailiff and said, go, I have got the floor. And that settled it. Because in 50 years, Ruthie has never once not had the floor. I drove us across town to a soup place where nobody knew us, and I watched my father check the clock over the counter 4 times before the food came. A man doing math about prep lists. In a restaurant, he was not even inside. He went to pay. I let him get his wallet all the way out, on purpose, because I needed to see it. $3, a coffee punch card, and a photograph of my mother at the register, 1976. That was the whole wallet. A man who had worked 6 days that week, $3. And in the truck afterward, with the rain on the roof and no schedule listening, my father finally handed me the shape of it, quietly, apologizing the entire time. And if you have ever heard a proud person apologize for being in their own life, you know. It is the worst sound there is. No paycheck since the party, but it evens out. Honey, we settle up later. The $800 a month. 4 shared costs. The amendment he signed in the casserole weeks that made him an advisor. Just paperwork. Kiddo, the application fee he was quietly saving. And here my chest went sideways, because my father, it turned out, had picked up a brochure for a room and board arrangement out by the lake. A place where he could do kitchen work in exchange for rent. He is a good worker, he said. They would get a fair deal, and he thought maybe that way he would stop being what he called overhead. My father, planning to work for his housing at 71, so his son's restaurant would run lighter without him on it. He called that plan tidy. My hands stayed at 10 and 2. My voice stayed level, because he needed level more than I needed to feel things. I said, nobody is overhead. Dad, and you are not going back Monday. He looked at me the way he looks at lake weather, half hope, half fear, and he said the thing that armed every fuse I ever lit afterward. He said, "Honey, do not be hard on your brother. He carries so much. I know. He keeps track. Your brother always says, we will settle up later." That night, alone, driving back to the motel on State Street, I stopped at a red light and I cried. Hard, once, for exactly the length of the light. When it turned green, I was done. That is the only time in this entire story. So mark it. Before I show you the shoebox, I want to know something, and I want you to answer honestly. If you sat at that counter, in that ball cap, and heard your own father called basically retired over the sound of him working, could you have stayed silent until the paperwork was ready? One word, in the comments. If your family has one of these stories, if somebody you love ever worked for nothing, while the book said otherwise, type the word unpaid. I read every one of them, and I want to know how many of us there are. And if you are new here, subscribe, because you are about to watch a payroll auditor come home. The shoebox happened that same evening, at my father's house. And it is the reason this story ends the way it ends. He went to find me spare towels, and the hall closet door was open. And on the shelf where the towels live, there was a shoebox with a rubber band around it. And on the lid, in his careful block printing, 2 words: settle up. I should not have opened it. I am glad every day of my life that I opened it. Inside were the pads, dozens of them, rubber banded into bricks by month, 50-page dollar store order pads, going back years. And on every page, a date, and under the date, in pencil, the hours. In, at 5, out, at 5, covered dinner, deep cleaned the hood, trained the new kid, fixed the compressor. Again, every single working day, since the party, where his son retired him. 140 weeks of a man's labor, written down in his own hand, every night, at this kitchen table. Not because he was building a case. My father does not build cases. He wrote it down because his whole life, that is what a day of work deserved. A line in the book. He found me sitting on the hallway floor, with a pad in each hand. He looked embarrassed, which nearly ended me, and he said, "Oh, that is just habit, honey. It is for whenever your brother and I settle up. Habit. Listen to me. In my profession, we have a name for a contemporaneous record of hours worked, kept daily in the worker's own hand. We call it the strongest evidence there is." My father had spent 3 years accidentally assembling the single most devastating document a wage case can contain. $1 store pad at a time, out of pure decency, and the people upstairs in his life had been too busy renaming his hash to notice the old man writing everything down. Ruthie came by the house that night with a peach pie, because Ruthie handles things, and the 3 of us sat at my father's kitchen table. And when Dad stepped out to the porch, she looked at the shoebox, and then at me, and she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Honey, they did not steal his money first. They stole his say. So, the money is just the place where the taking finally shows." I did not answer her. There was nothing to add. Some sentences you just carry out of the room and keep. Here is what I did over the next 19 days. And I want you to notice what is missing from this list. There is no screaming in it. There is no post online. There is no showdown at the diner in front of the regulars. In my work, the loud moment is the last moment, and it is only as strong as the quiet weeks behind it. So here are the quiet weeks. Fast. Day 1. My father called in sick for the first time in anyone's memory. And then he kept being sick, indefinitely, on my instruction with Ruthie running interference. I wish I could tell you the diner ran fine. Without him, it did not. Within a week, Kurt had hired 2 temporary cooks and was arriving at 5 in the morning himself. And I confess that watching my brother discover, hour by hour, the exact size of the hole where a free man used to stand, gave me something, not joy. Call it arithmetic. Day 2. I drove my father 1 county over, to a lawyer I had found. A small-town woman who reads documents the way an X-ray reads a leg. Not our family lawyer, not anyone Kurt golfs with. My father sat with his hat in his lap and apologized to her for the trouble twice before she finished her coffee. She read the amendment, the 2 kitchen table pages that turned an owner into an advisor, and I watched her eyebrows do something I have only ever seen on auditors. Then, she laid it flat and said 3 things. 1. This was never notarized. In plain words, no official ever verified this signing. 2. It was never filed with the state, meaning that as far as Pennsylvania is concerned, this piece of paper is a rumor. And 3. And she smiled here for the first time, the diner's own registration renewal, filed the following year by Kurt himself, still lists Gene Marsh, 50% owner. My brother had unowned our father in one file cabinet and forgotten to unown him in the other. She looked over her glasses at my father and said, "Sir, you never stopped owning half of that restaurant, not for 1 day." My father was quiet for a long moment, and then he asked her, so gently it hurt, "Does Kurt know that?" And the lawyer said, "That is a very good question." Days 3 through 9. The wages. This is my language, so let me translate it as we go. My father signed a paper making me his authorized representative, which in plain words means I could request his own records on his behalf. All legal, all standard. The same form I hand to workers every month of my working life. And the records came back, and there it was. The thing I told you to hold on to at the beginning. For 140 weeks, the diner's payroll reported wages to my father, $15 an hour, 50 hours a week, $750 a week. On paper, week after week, tax forms issued in his name every January, wages recorded in the books, wages deducted as a business expense, and in his actual bank account across those same 140 weeks. Deposits from the diner, 0, not small, not late, 0. Wetendindi, let me do this number for you, the way I finally did it for myself, sitting in a motel room, with a calculator I did not need, $750 a week, for 140 weeks, $800, $5,000. Paid on paper. Never paid in life. $105,000 is not a bookkeeping wrinkle. In my father's neighborhood, that is a whole house. That is his heart medication. Every month for the rest of his life, and his taxes, and the good coffee with room to spare. It was 3 years of an old man's labor, priced by his own son, at his own son's chosen rate, recorded by his own son's own hand, and then simply kept. Pennsylvania has a plain name for wages that were promised, recorded, and never delivered, and a state office whose entire job is collecting them, with penalties stacked on top. On day 9, as his representative, with his pads photocopied and his records attached, I filed my father's wage claim, quietly, correctly, on the standard form. I have filled out hundreds of them for strangers. My hands did not shake until the last page, where it asks your relationship to the worker, and I wrote the word daughter. And then there was the third thread, the one only I could pull, because I had been holding it for 6 years without knowing why. The lease. Riverbend Holdings, my little company, The landlord. My brother had been threatening in emails. Since the month I saved his diner, the lease on the building had a term, and the term ended on the 30th of the month, 19 days after that rainy anniversary morning. Renewal was not automatic, and my brother, punctual about exactly one thing in his life, had already emailed Riverbend demanding a meeting about renewal terms, a new HVAC unit, and, I am quoting him now, a rent structure that respects what this concept brings to the street. The concept. My father's diner. So Riverbend's lawyer, who is the same small-town woman with the X-ray eyes, wrote back and offered him a meeting at her office. 10 in the morning. Bring your repair list. Which brings us all the way back around to the conference room where you first met me. 10 in the morning. On a Wednesday. 19 days after the anniversary, a conference room with bad coffee and a long table. On one side, the lawyer, with a closed folder in front of her. Beside her, in his church coat, with his hat in his lap, my father. And beside him, me, with the shoebox. My brother walked in at 10 past, phone in hand, mid-sentence to somebody about a produce order. And it took him 3 full steps to understand. The room. I watched it land in stages. First, Dad, and confusion. Then me, and irritation. Then the shoebox, which meant nothing to him, because he had never once noticed our father writing in it. And that, right there, that little blankness on his face, told you everything about the last 3 years. He said, "What is this? Where is the landlord?" And I said, "Sit down, Kurt. You are looking at her. I want to tell you." I savored it. The truth is, it went through the room like cold water, and my brother laughed. Once the way you laugh at a thing you need to be a joke. So, the lawyer opened the folder. And we did it the way I do everything. 1 page at a time. Page 1. The certificate for Riverbend Holdings and the deed to the building under his feet. Sole member and owner, Dana Marsh. 6 years. He read it twice. He looked up at me, and the first thing out of his mouth, the very first thing, was, "You have been taking rent from your own family for 6 years." And I said, "No, I have been receiving it." And behind that page, the lawyer laid the next sheet, a summary, with copies attached, of 72 rent checks, each one signed with his big looping signature. $2,100 a month, for 72 months. $151,200, mailed by my brother, to the sister he told our cousins never gave this family a dime. I did not say that number out loud for me. I said it because our father was sitting there hearing, for the first time, that the soft-hearted stranger he had thanked in his prayers for 6 years was his daughter. He put his hand flat on the table when he heard it. He kept it there for the rest of the meeting. Page 2. The kitchen table amendment, side by side, with the state renewal filing from the following year. The lawyer did this part, in the friendly voice of a woman reading a weather report. Never notarized. Never filed. Contradicted by your own subsequent filing, which lists Jean Marsh, 50% owner. In plain words, she said, your father owns half of this business today, this morning, as we sit here, and has owned it every single day you have been calling him an advisor. Which means, among other things, that he is owed an accounting of 3 years of profits you have treated as yours. My brother started to say the word dad, and our father looked at him. Just looked, and Kurt stopped. Page 3. And here I took over, because this one is mine. The payroll. The tax forms in Dad's name. 3 Januaries running. The reported wages, $15 an hour. 50 hours a week, week after week. Set beside his bank records, where across 140 weeks, the deposits from the diner came to 0. And I said, Kurt, You priced him yourself. $750 a week. So here is your own math. 140 weeks. $105,000. Contingent. Recorded by you. Deducted by you. And kept by you. The state received his claim 10 days ago. And then I took the rubber band off the shoebox, and I set the pads on the table in their bricks, month by month. And I turned one to face him. His own father's handwriting. In at 5. And out at 5. Fixed the compressor. Again. And under that week, like every week, in pencil, the 2 words, settle up. He went through the pads with his thumb, the way you check a deck of cards, faster and faster. And I watched my brother, 45 years old, meet the man he had been living off of, $1 store page at a time, and his face did something complicated, and for a second, 1 second, he was just Kurt, the brother who taught me to drive in the diner parking lot. And his voice came out low, and he said, I was drowning. The year Mom died. The books were drowning. I told myself I would square it all. When we were solid, every month, I told myself that it was never supposed to be. And he stopped, because there is no good end to that sentence. And he knew it. I did not raise my voice. To this day, I have not raised my voice, I said. Then you will appreciate that today is the day it all gets squared. And here is your one choice. Not 2. Option A. You sign the restoration papers confirming what was always true, that Dad owns half. You resign from running the day-to-day. You sign a wage note, $1,200 a month, every month, until the last of the $105,000 is home, and the state claim gets settled inside that note, instead of at a hearing. And the lease on this building renews to the partnership, with Dad's signature required on it, not yours alone. Option B. Dendwishausen. There is no option B that you walk out of taller. On the 30th, the lease simply ends. The wage claim goes to a hearing with the shoebox on the table. The ownership question goes to a courtroom in the county where everyone knows your face, and every filing where you recorded wages you never paid goes, by law, exactly where such filings go. I am not threatening you. Kurt, I am reading you the schedule. And then I said the last part, and I made myself say it evenly, because it was the truest thing in the room. You always told him you would settle up later. You put the words in his mouth. He wrote them on a shoebox. It is later. Kurt, it is 10:40 in the morning. And it is finally later. My father spoke exactly once in that room. He did not speak to the papers. He spoke to his son in the voice he used to use for burned hands and failed math tests. And he said, I would have given you everything, son, everything. And gladly, you only had to leave it mine to give. Kurt did not sign that day. I want to be honest about that, because real endings are not tidy. He stood up, called the whole meeting a shakedown, told our father he was being used, and left. And then came the 3 days I had budgeted for, because I have watched 100 cornered companies do this exact dance. That night, 3 voicemails on my phone, the first one furious, the second one lawyerly, and the third one soft, which was the worst one, Kurt asking me to put Dad on, saying, tell him family does not do this to family. I did not delete them. Evidence is evidence, even when it is sad. The next morning, Bryn posted a long paragraph online about how a certain member of this family had chosen lawyers over love, and the supper crowd she performed it for read it, and said nothing, and quietly started asking Ruthie how Jean was doing. And on Saturday my brother appeared on our father's porch with donuts and a folder of his own, a counteroffer, in which Dad would receive the title of lifetime advisor, and $500 a month, which Kurt called appreciation. My father stood behind the screen door in his cardigan, and he did not shout either. It turns out it runs in the family. And he said, the door will be blue again by the first. Son, after that, you can knock on it like anybody, and it will open like it always did. But I am done being appreciated. I have seen what I am worth on paper. Now, match it. On Wednesday, my brother's own accountant, a man he pays to tell him the truth, evidently told him the truth. And on Thursday morning, at 9, Kurt sat in that same conference room and signed every page without a speech, with a promotional pen from the rebrand. The Marsh table printed on the barrel, in a font somebody was paid to choose. The rebrand's last official act was signing itself away. I noticed, and I let it alone. Some things collect their own debts. 5 weeks later, here is where everything landed. The gray came off the door on a Saturday. We did it ourselves. No consultant. My father cut in the edges with his 2-inch brush, one careful coat, and my niece, who is 8, painted the bottom corner where a kid can reach, and got more blue on her elbows than the wood. And my father let her, which tells you the whole state of his heart. The sign came down at my brother's expense. That was in the settlement, too. And the Blue Door Diner went back up over the window in the same lettering a sign painter's granddaughter still had the stencils for. My mother's photograph came out of the storeroom box and went back on its nail by the register, 1976. Her hand on his chest, both of them laughing. Ruthie runs the floor now. With a manager title she pretended for one full day not to want. Jean's hash is Jean's hash. And on reopening morning there was a line down Cascade Street in the cold regulars, and their grown kids and 2 news cameras. And at 6 sharp my 71-year-old father, half owner, on payroll, at $19 an hour. Because I ran the comparables myself, turned the sign, and held the blue door open, and said what he has said for 50 years. Come in, hungry. The first $1,200 arrived on the 1st of the month, on time, to the same post office box that took his rent for 6 years. I do not read my brother's memo lines. I read the postmark. On time is the only apology that spends, and every month I sign that check straight over to my father, which has become my favorite chore in the world. For 6 years, that little box held a secret I kept to protect 2 men's pride. Now it holds the receipt of 1 man's worth, coming home $1,200 at a time, and the box did not change at all. Only the direction of the truth did. The state's finding arrived 9 weeks after the filing. For the record, confirming every number in the note. I keep it in the folder. Some papers you frame. Some you just keep loaded and curt. My brother works in sales now, for a restaurant supply company, 2 towns over. He sells napkins and fryer oil to kitchens he does not run. And by every account he is good at it, because he was always good at the front of the house. And I mean that with no cruelty at all. He has not apologized. He sent 1 text near the end of my leave that said, "Glad Dad is squared away." Someone had to make sure of it. I read that text standing in the yard with a paintbrush in my hand, and I thought about answering it for a while. And then I put the phone in my pocket, because some checks you answer, and some you just cash. But my niece comes for pancakes every Sunday. That survived. That is the thread we saved. And Kurt drops her at the curb and waits in the car. And every single Sunday, my father steps out on the stoop and waves at that car. The car has not waved back yet. My father waves anyway. If you want to know the difference between the 2 men, it is all there on that curb. Every Sunday, at 9 in the morning, last month, I signed a new arrangement of my own. Fewer road audits, more remote work, and 1 long weekend a month in Erie, in my old room, which now has a shelf where the shoebox sits. Retired, rubber band and all, because my father says you do not throw out a ledger just because it balanced. My father used to say, A door tells people what to expect from the kitchen. It took me 6 years as a secret landlord, 3 years of paper paychecks, 1 shoebox, and 19 days to finally learn the whole meaning. You take care of the people who fed you, not with words, and not even with money, but with your name on the right papers, your numbers checked twice, and your voice level in the one meeting where it counts. The door on Cascade Street is blue again, and it is not just paint anymore. It is a posted notice in my father's brushstrokes that says the people in this kitchen are paid and named, and nobody here works for free. Ever again. We are settled, and the door is open. That is my story. One rainy stakeout, 1 shoebox, and a father who gets a paycheck he can cash. If this reminded you of somebody, go ask the questions this week. Whose name is on the business? Whose name is on the payroll? And whether the paper and the money actually match. Because I promise you, in more families than you think, they are strangers. If somebody you love has ever been paid in promises, share this with the one person who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one, right here on Quiet Ledger Stories.